Yo, what's up, guys? We're back, man. JJK, chapter 164. It's good to have JJK back. And I want to say, man, I'm really loving the stuff with Higuruma, but I wanted to quickly comment on a tweet I saw recently. There was a discussion of some people saying that JJK has been like really slow lately, and I just completely disagree. Like, we've had back to back, in my opinion, just straight 10 out of 10 arc and mini arc. Like the whole thing with Shibuya, 10 out of 10. The whole thing with Maki versus Zenin clan, 10 out of 10. I mean, non-stop action. Now we get a little bit of break after that, and now we're getting into the rules of the culling game. Like, this is all setting up to be something bigger. And I just think, like, for the people that give One Piece so much slack and all this stuff, like, if you're also reading JJK and you read, like, say, One Piece, like, I don't think you have any right to say how JJK is slow. You know what I mean? Especially after the great arcs it's given us. I think it deserves all the patience. Gege has been doing a great job, man, and I've really been loving everything. So, yeah, let's get into it, guys. So, chapter 164. Which is Tokyo Colony, I guess, part 4, right? So, we got Higuruma stanced up, ready to go. And out of nowhere, and I was shocked this happened, but he automatically does a domain expansion. I was like, yo, what? So, he's pretty powerful, and I can see why has 100 points. Pretty crazy. And the name of the domain expansion is Forced Suicide Punishment, right? So, Yuji goes in for the attack, and the attack misses, basically. And it looks like he kind of teleports behind the kick. And he basically explains that all violence is prohibited within the court. But he mentions, funnily to me, he says verbal violence is a whole nother case, though. And he lands actually right where he was standing before. So now we have the Judgement, right? And the Judgement says, Itadori Yuji is under the suspicion of entering the pachinko shop Magi Vegas as a customer on July 16, 2017, despite being under the age of 18. And, you know, pachinko shop, for those of you who don't know, that's the little games where you can play to win, like, the little toys in that ball thing, or just, it's basically gambling. It's a little gambling kiosk, basically, where you gamble for different prizes. So Yuji's like, wait, what? And then he's like, oh yeah, I remember Magi Vegas. And he's like, well, it's and then this is key right here, and I want to read this. Judgment knows everything about the individuals inside of this domain, but don't worry, that information isn't shared with me. So he doesn't know directly this info. That's key. Judgment will only be decided based on our claims, with the exception of a single piece of evidence, essentially, right? So, he then says, this evidence regarding your case was submitted by Judgment. So, both of them will make a claim. Yuji has a chance to make a claim, and then Higuruma will make a claim. But his claim, since he gets a piece of evidence, will be based off of that evidence, and he will then make his own claim, right? And then at that point, Yuji has to prove his innocence, right? So that's where this gets interesting. So he basically explains that, you know, no suspicion is necessarily placed on you, but you gotta clear your suspicion if you want to win acquittal from Judgment. So he's got to prove himself innocent. And then he's basically talking to himself, and he's like, okay, a court-based technique, like, that's interesting. And then he notices that, okay, he's actually a lawyer because of the badge that he has. And he remembers talking to Tengen-sama, which is pretty interesting. I like this tidbit of information. So what Tengen basically explains is that domain expansions of today are much more complicated than domains of the past. Domains of the past were standard techniques, and the reason for this, he says, is a difference between a sure hit factor and a sure kill factor. So he explains, to allow for sure hit, you must enforce your own rule upon the subject in your domain. And he said that was the standards. the difference now is that, one, sorcerers these days have been hung up on the short kill factor, which has in turn led less people to attaining something like a domain expansion. And the reason being is because now it's a common thing for people to be like, okay, if he has a short kill domain expansion, I want to get one. So forget about a short hit or putting upon a rule that may not kill your opponent. I need a short kill, something that'll guarantee me my win. So less and less people began having the ability to learn domain expansion because they wanted that surefire way of winning, right? So he basically explains that short kill method, the condition to create a domain were drastically increased, and domains became a high level technique, leading to less users being able to obtain it. And so he deduces that, and he's like, okay, this domain isn't a short kill. It can't physically harm me. So he's like, okay, this isn't a bad thing. And I find this interesting because this goes with Higuruma's character. He's giving everyone a fair chance, based on his past and what we know him for doing. So he doesn't want to just kill off people. He wants fair, in a sense, fair judgment, but he wants some type of judgment. He wants the other side to at least get through to him or Judgement and make their case, right? So this plays into him being a lawyer. But he's kind of thinking that, okay, this isn't a short kill, so I'm safe. And he basically says there's only one chance to make your statement. Once you're done, I'll basically go, and then that's when everything will be decided by Judgement, and everything will be based off of the 6 codes, and these 6 codes are the legal laws in Japan, right? And so he asks an interesting question, which is Yuji does. He says, what happens if I'm found guilty? And he doesn't know. Everything is based off of his curse technique, but he does let him know that you have 3 options: silence, confession, denial. And no matter what he does, like, Judgement will know the truth. So best to play what you think will work best for you. Now, he goes over his options. He thinks about that evidence. He says if the evidence is a dud and it can't really prove anything, he can basically remain silent or just deny the claims. But if the evidence proves that he entered the shop, maybe he can make up an excuse. But if that evidence is a dud and he thinks it's a dud, he can end up digging his own grave if he admits to being in the store. So the first option, he thinks it's a dud, and he can just lie and be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I didn't do anything, or just remain silent. Second is, if it is evidence of him, and if this is evidence of him actually doing what he did in the store, he could try making up some excuse of why he was in there, or he could also do something that'll lead to him digging his own grave if he admitted to being into the store. So it could lead to him having harsher punishment if he admits to it. And 3, if the evidence proves that he was in there and he played, it's game over for him, basically. And he may be able to wager on getting a lighter sentence. So he's got those 3 options in his head, and he goes for the second option, right? So he lightly tells the truth. I entered the pachinko shop, Magi Vegas, but I only borrowed the restroom due to a sudden call of nature. So he went to the bathroom, he's saying. So he was in there, but he didn't do the necessary crime of playing the slots, right? And you could see that he doesn't want to go with 3 because he thinks it's too risky. And then now it's Higuruma's turn. Opens up the evidence, and it's a straight up picture of Yuji in front of one of the exchange slots, right? And so based off of this, he's like, you were by a security camera near a store near the Magi Vegas shop where you can exchange winnings for cash. And then he said, your face, your stature, everything lines up of you, Yuji Tadori. So he basically, what happened here is he didn't necessarily have to say that he was in the Magi Vegas shop, because based off the evidence, he was near a store where he was exchanging cash for, or winnings for cash, right? So he actually could have avoided telling that much of the information, but since he admitted to being in the store, he's got him on the hook. So his whole claim of, oh, you know, I had to go to the restroom, that doesn't sound likely anymore. And Yuji's kind of complaining, like, what kind of crime is that? And he basically explains that, you know, if a store explicitly says that those under 18 cannot come here, you're basically breaking into that residency. And he says, oh, well, that's not fair. Any excuse I would have made would have been pointless. And he says, you know, he explains again, that's not necessarily true. Like, you can enter in certain stores and there could be over 18, like, say, kiosks or cash winnings and stuff like that. Like, there's certain stores where it could be a convenience store, but there's places to gamble. Those are separate from so those are separate under gambling laws, right? Because it's a store and they've got cash exchanges for different things. So though technically it's not necessarily unfair, right? So it's very interesting. It's a little confusing, but if you break it down, it's you went into this place that is strictly a gambling place versus you went into a place that's a store with gambling kiosks, right? And he basically tells Yuji, all you have to do is deny the accusation by saying, I've never even heard of that store, because the picture of him in a convenience store wouldn't necessarily mean that he was in the Magi Vegas store, but he wanted to be safe and at least tell the truth. So it's tough. It's really tough, right? Instead, he said, and then Hiruma says, wait, the judgment hasn't yet been decided. So Judgement says guilty, and then after guilty, he says confiscation. And then that's when everything disappears, and then we see Higuruma go in, throws the mallet, dashes to Yuji, and then he kind of twists his arms in a way that he's holding a hammer, and then the hammer appears. So we automatically can get from this, and Yuji says it later, that the hammer can manifest whenever he needs it to manifest, and it can also get bigger. And you can see there's cursed energy around it, and he basically hits Yuji across the theater, and he's like, oh man, you're sturdy. And he's like, yeah, that's my selling point, basically. And we find out at the very last panel here that the confiscation was he can't muster up any cursed energy. So this was a very interesting chapter. It really kind of goes to show how unique a lot of these techniques are, in that he has more of a short hit domain expansion versus a short kill, which kind of made things a little bit more I guess less dangerous for Yuji, to where he wanted to play along, and he had to play along anyway, but he wasn't under the fear that I might die from this, because if he was, he might have made some other different decisions. So guys, I mean, JJK is something else, man. Let me know what you guys think. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment section. Please like the video, man. Another great chapter, JJK.